Dark screen. A single chime echoes like a funeral bell. Whispered they were never supposed to leave. Pause. Not the convent, not the church, not even this world. For over a century, the diocese claimed they were transferred, reassigned, but buried beneath cracked limestone floors and behind false chapel walls were truths soaked in silence and bone. Between 1854 and 1862, 23 nuns vanished from St. Mary's Convent near Lake Michigan. No records, no bodies, no farewells, just empty beds. And whispers that made even priests cross themselves. Twice. Today, I'm going to show you what they found behind the sealed wall cavity during renovations, and what the Vatican paid millions to keep hidden. This isn't a ghost story. This is a ritual of control, cloaked in sanctity, and sharpened like a blade. And once you understand what really happened at St. Mary's, you'll never see faith, authority, or obedience the same way again. But I warn you, what you're about to hear has never been approved by the church. It wasn't meant for public ears. It's the kind of knowledge that makes good men fall silent, and bad men rich, and once you hear it, you can't unhear it. Long pause. Ambient sound swells wind through dead trees. Distant tolling bell. The year was 1854. Wisconsin was still wild, a place of endless pine forests, Lutheran suspicion, and opportunity. The Catholic Church, seeking dominion in America's frontier, acquired a mansion near Lake Michigan. 3 wings of coldstone, surrounded by 30 acres of isolated woodland. They named it Este Mary's. To outsiders, it was a place of mercy, housing orphans, tending the sick. But beneath the daily rosaries and acts of charity, something darker took root, something older than the church. And its roots spread through doctrine, obedience, and silence. The founding Mother Superior, Catherine Murphy, was praised as a saint, sharp-featured, blue-eyed, obedient to no one but Rome. But behind her folded hands lay a mind wired for hierarchy and dominance. A woman not interested in salvation, but controlled. By winter's end, she had 20 young nuns under her thumb, most barely past girlhood. All Irish immigrants with no family, no money, and no way out. They prayed, they bled, they obeyed, and then they began to disappear. One by one, without warning, without trace. The church said they were transferred, promoted, called to serve elsewhere. But a century later, a hidden cache of letters, locked in a wall sealed with lime, told another story. A story of punishments disguised as penance. Voices silenced by sacred oaths, and rituals conducted beneath flickering chapel lights that had nothing to do with God. The first to vanish was Sister Agnes. Oh, single quotes Connor, she was 23, quiet, devout, known for her golden hair and gentle nature. The kind of young woman sculptors imagined when they carved saints, eyes soft with mercy, spine rigid with conviction. She was the last person you'd expect to disobey, the first you'd choose to sacrifice. One cold April morning, her place in the chapel stood empty. Not just her, everything. Her bed, perfectly made. Her prayer book, missing. Her rosary gone. Mother Catherine announced during breakfast that Sister Agnes had been called to assist at a mission in Minnesota. A blessing, she said. A sign of her exceptional devotion, but no. One saw her leave. No coach, no horse, no farewell. No letter ever arrived. And in the brutal logic of convent life, silence swallowed doubt. Questioning the superior was questioning God. But one nun did question it. Sister Bernadette Walsh, Agnes' closest friend. She asked why Agnes hadn't spoken of the transfer. Why she left without her cloak in April, in Minnesota. Mother Catherine's reply was a threat hidden inside scripture. Are you suggesting, she said slowly, that obedience should be weighed against friendship? That night, Sister Bernadette wept silently into her blanket. A week later, she too was gone, transferred. Mother Catherine said, Chicago this time. The pattern had begun. Each disappearance followed the same ritual, no witness, no warning, no departure scene. Just a name spoken with finality, and an explanation soaked in reverence. And always, it was the youngest. The kindest ones who spoke gently, questioned rules, or offered worm, when others enforced cold order. Some began to whisper, others prayed harder, but the real fear settled in their bones. Not spoken aloud, but understood, like the sharp snap of a ruler in a quiet room. They were being watched, they were being chosen, and no one was coming to save them. By winter's end, 5 more had left. Some supposedly went to Cincinnati, others to Baltimore. None wrote back. None were heard from again. It wasn't until 1861 that the first crack appeared in the narrative. A single letter, written by Sister Margaret, head of the infirmary, and never meant to be found. Hidden inside the lining of her medical satchel, it was discovered over 100 years later by a team cataloging religious relics in Milwaukee. In it, she wrote of rituals held in secret, of Mother Catherine's unnatural power over the girls, and of voices chanting beneath the chapel floor. But one sentence, written in a shaking hand, burned itself into history. They do not leave, they are taken, one by one. For a purpose we dare not name, they are taken, one by one, for a purpose we dare not name. That line wasn't written in metaphor, it was a warning, and a confession. Sister Margaret, a woman of science, not hysteria, had served as St. Mary's infirmarian for nearly 7 years. She knew pain, she knew disease. But what she described in that letter was not sickness. It was something older, something ritualistic. She wrote of girls waking with blood on their sheets, not from illness, but from marks carved with precision into their skin, small symbols, always in 3s, always near the spine. She wrote of how their behavior changed in the days before they departed, blank stares, long periods of silence, a sudden disinterest in food, in prayer, in everything. She treated their wounds, she questioned Mother Catherine, and she was punished. Locked for 3 days in the old furnace cellar, no food, no light, no warmth. When she emerged, her skin was pale, her hands shook, but her eyes were colder than before. She stopped asking questions, but she never stopped documenting Margaret's secret journals. Found decades later, hidden beneath chapel floorboards, revealed a pattern too deliberate to be coincidence. Every disappearance coincided with the new moon. Always at night. Always when the convent was at its darkest. No bells rang. No horses came. Just the sudden absence of a life. She also noted something chilling. The garden, in 1856. A second walled garden was constructed behind the infirmary. No one but Mother Catherine and Margaret were allowed inside. The herbs grown there were not for fever or pain. They were ancient, belladonna henbane monkshood. Herbs used not for healing, but for inducing trance, paralysis, and silence. In one journal entry, Margaret wrote, "I prepare the tinctures, she administers them. The girls sleep too deeply now. Their mouths open, but no sound escapes. I fear I have become her instrument." She wasn't just treating the nuns. She was sedating them, unwillingly, or perhaps obediently. And still, the church said nothing. No inquiry, no visitors, no priests sent to inspect, because St. Mary's had become profitable. Donations from grateful families flowed in. Protestant communities grudgingly acknowledged their charity. The bishop boasted of the convent's spiritual efficiency, but efficiency was a mask. A front behind it was a system, precise, controlled, hierarchical, designed to eliminate witnesses. Not in a frenzy of violence, not with blood, but with silence, with ritual, with obedience enforced by fear and theological manipulation. And by 1860, only 14 of the original 23 remained. The rest, gone without a trace. Now, if you're beginning to see how deep this deception goes, comment silent, no more, below. Twice, but once for what you've seen. Twice for the man you are becoming. Because after the next section, the mask comes off completely. By the spring of 1860, something had shifted at St. Mary's. Even the trees seemed to lean away from the stone convent. Their branches warped like reaching hands, pulling back from what had taken root inside. Locals no longer approached the grounds. After sundown, farmers whispered of lights flickering in the bell tower at midnight, though no bells ever rang. Children said they heard singing coming from the woods. Not hymns. Something older, off-key. in a language they didn't recognize, but instinctively feared, and within the convent walls, obedience had metastasized into terror. No one smiled. No one lingered after meals. Each nun walked with eyes lowered, hands folded, not in reverence, but in submission. Mother Catherine no longer walked among them like a shepherd. She watched them from shadowed corners, from behind half doors. Her once piercing blue eyes had dulled to a pale silver, as if reflecting something else. And her punishments grew more creative. Sister Teresa Donovan, the tall farm girl with a spine forged in Irish mud and prayer, began to resist. She questioned, she observed, she kept track. 10 nuns gone, all young, all beautiful, all with gifts that set them apart. Teresa noticed that every one had once defied Mother Catherine, even subtly. A late arrival to prayer. A question too boldly asked. A moment of warmth shared in a world ruled by coldness. And then there were the markings. She found them first on her own back, faint, 3 small lines above her left shoulder blade. She thought it was from work, from carrying sacks of grain for the orphans. But then Sister Mary Collins showed her the same marks, identical, fresh. Both had felt the same thing the night before, a heaviness in their limbs, like they had been drugged, and a sound. A low hum beneath the floorboards. A voice, maybe chanting their names. They decided to stay awake the next new moon. They drank no tea, took no bread. Lay in their beds, fully clothed, fingers wrapped tight around rosaries. What they saw that night shattered the last illusions of piety within those walls. Shortly after midnight, footsteps echoed through the dormitory. Soft, barefoot. Sister Elizabeth, the maternal, ever-smiling orphan mistress, walked from bed to bed. Stopping at certain cots, she leaned close, whispered something, and in each case, the sister stirred, then went still. She reached Mary Collins' bed, but Mary did not move. She kept her breathing steady. Elizabeth paused, watched her face, then moved on. Teresa swore she saw a dark shape waiting at the dormitory door. Not a nun, not a man, something taller, wrapped in cloth that shimmered like smoke. It took Mary days to speak again, and when she finally did, her voice was raw, her eyes hollow. She whispered, "We are the bride, the offering, the vessel." The next morning, 2 more nuns were transferred, but Teresa had seen enough. She began writing pages hidden beneath the chapel's cracked altar stone. Names, dates, symbols, suspicions, and one terrifying certainty. This is not the church. This is something older. Wearing the church's skin, there are things older than Scripture, older than Rome, older than Christ, and some of them wear vestments now. Teresa Donovan had begun to understand that by the winter of 1860, when the sky over St. Mary's stayed grey for 43 straight days, and not a single bird was heard in the forest. It wasn't just the disappearances, it was the atmosphere, the pressure in the air, like the land itself was suffocating beneath secrets. She'd stopped sleeping, stopped eating much. Her time was spent watching, recording, pretending to obey while quietly documenting. And what she found in the hidden records of the convent's foundation shook even her iron faith. St. Mary's had not been built by accident. The land had once belonged to the Menominee people, who refused to settle there, even during harsh winters. They called the area Pamesu Wickamquan, the place where the breath is taken, a death place, a veil place, a site, they believed, where the boundary between the living and the dead was thinner than paper. When the church acquired the estate, they didn't just select it for isolation, they chose it because of alignment. The convent was constructed, with the east wing, the nuns' quarters, placed directly over a network of shallow limestone caverns. Caverns once used by the native tribes, not for burial, but for containment. And beneath the central chapel, Teresa discovered, through hidden blueprints, found sewn into an old psalter, a chamber that did not appear on any diocesan maps. A crypt without saints, a space without blessing, she suspected. That was where the rituals happened. Not the chants of Latin above ground, but the other tongue. The one Sister Margaret had mentioned. The one Elizabeth whispered when she thought the girls were asleep. But the church knew. In 1859, a traveling bishop from Quebec visited briefly. He had a reputation, discreet, inquisitive, and rumored to have investigated other miraculous sites across North America. He spent one night at St. Mary's. By morning, he was gone. A week later, the convent received a donation of $10,000, an astronomical sum at the time, marked only as for the continuation of sacred work in silence. Teresa knew then, this wasn't a rogue convent. This wasn't heresy. This was sanctioned. The church didn't want to stop it, they wanted it contained. Because whatever force had been unearthed in that place, whatever entity now whispered to Catherine in the shadows and fed on the obedience of girls had become useful. It bound the nuns in absolute silence. It created an order of fear so perfect that no external force of man or God could break its hand in a world where control was the highest currency. That kind of power was sacred. Not to be destroyed, but to be replicated. The crypt beneath the chapel was never meant to be found. It wasn't listed in the convent's ledgers. It wasn't referenced in diocesan records. It didn't appear on maps, blueprints, or property documents. But it was real. And Teresa Donovan found the entrance in the spring of 1861, hidden behind a carved wooden panel beneath the altar. The panel depicted the crucifixion, but beneath Christ's feet, a small triangle, etched so faintly it seemed like an accident, hid the mechanism. She pressed it, the floor shifted. Stone scraped stone, and cold air, ancient, wet, wrong, rushed upward like a breath, exhaled after centuries of silence. She descended alone, torch in hand, knees shaking. What she found was not a crypt. Not in the way we understand it. There were no graves, no bones, no saints, just a circular chamber, carved with impossible precision. And symbols, hundreds of them, not Latin, not Greek, older, cut into the stone with something not quite human, spirals within spirals. Inverted eye symbols that moved when she looked too long. At the center, a stone basin, empty, but stained, as if it had once been full of something thick, something living. And surrounding the basin, 3 rows of kneeling platforms. Exactly 20-3.1 for each nun who had vanished. Teresa staggered back, bile rising in her throat. She turned to flee, but froze as she saw the far wall. A fresco, painted with obsessive detail, hidden from every living soul for over 100 years. It depicted a woman, tall, veiled, arms outstretched. Behind her, a mass of indistinct shapes, not angels, not demons, not people, something else. Watching, feeding, at her feet, kneeling in supplication, nuns, all faceless, all bleeding from the spine. Above them, a phrase, obedientia est sacrificium. Obedience is sacrifice. This wasn't Catholicism. This wasn't even heresy. This was devotion weaponized, the church's hunger for control, twisted into a ritual designed to extract the will from a woman and offer it up. Not to God, to something much darker. Teresa fled. She sealed the door. She wrote what she saw, hid the notes inside the hollow leg of a pew in the infirmary, one that would not be discovered until the 1980s, during a renovation. That record ended with these words: "The church has birthed something it cannot unmake, and it will not try. They feed it obedience, and it gives them silence." After that, her own letters stopped. Her name was never listed among the transfers. She simply disappeared. No one asked why. The Vatican knew. They always knew, not just about St. Mary's, but about other places like it. Hidden cells of spiritual manipulation, cloaked in sacraments, but built on submission rituals older than the church itself. St. Mary's wasn't an outlier. It was a template, and when Teresa Donovan disappeared, when her final writings vanished into a hollow pew, unseen for over a century, something even more chilling happened. St. Mary's Convent burned on a frigid morning in February 1862. Smoke was seen rising above the tree line by a local woodsman. By the time help arrived, the east wing, the nuns' quarters, was engulfed in flame. Strangely, only that wing, not the chapel, not the infirmary, not the orphanage, just the section where the nuns slept. The official report, written by a diocesan investigator named Father Marius Denton, attributed the cause to an improperly tended hearth fire. But what he wrote in a private letter to the Archbishop of Milwaukee told a different story. There was no evidence of fuel. The fire appears to have started from inside the walls themselves. It spread without smoke, consumed without ash. The sisters, they did not run. They did not run. 12 nuns were lost that day. Not one tried to escape. Their charred remains were found kneeling, as if in prayer, as if waiting. Mother Catherine's body was never found, nor Sister Elizabeth's, nor Sister Margaret's. No funerals were held, no public mourning, just a quiet relocation of the orphans. And a hasty announcement: the convent has fulfilled its holy mission. But behind closed doors, Rome moved quickly. The land was bought by a private ecclesiastical trust. The ruins were buried under layers of limestone. The cavern beneath the altar, filled with molten lead. The frescoes, chiseled to dust. And every document mentioning St. Mary's was quietly removed from diocesan archives, except one, a sealed file, stamped with the sigil of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, the Vatican's oldest and most secretive branch. Its title, Ordo Silent II. The Order of Silence. It described in clinical Latin a framework for psychological obedience extracted through ritual deprivation, symbol-based trance induction, and identity dissolution via monastic hierarchies. And it named St. Mary's as the first American prototype. This was never about faith, it was about testing the architecture of control. How much silence can a soul endure before it forgets its own name? How many rituals until the self dissolves entirely? The church found the answer in Wisconsin, and once they had it, they erased the experiment, but not to destroy it, to replicate it on larger scales. In other institutions, in other names, they buried the convent. But they didn't bury the method. St. Mary's was the matchstick. What followed was the fire. Because once the church, or any institution, discovers a system that can break the will of a human being without ever laying a finger on them, they keep it, they rename it, they modernize it, but they never ever let it go. The framework of ritual obedience born in that Wisconsin crypt lives on, not just in convents, but in every system designed to extract loyalty without resistance. You've seen it, you've felt it, not in robes and incense, but in fluorescent lights, locked doors, and surveillance cameras. In military barracks, in psychiatric wards, in correctional facilities, and elite boarding schools, same rules, same architecture, same silence: deprive, isolate, repeat, ritualize, break, replace that. They learned from St. Mary's that obedience becomes salvation when the alternative is madness. That if you surround a person with symbols, ancient or modern, and strip them of identity, they will begin to adopt whatever identity they're offered. They will kneel, they will chant, they will enforce their own captivity. It was never about God, it was about hierarchy. And the ones who survived, St. Mary's, if any did, were never truly free again. They carried that programming in their bones. Even decades later, former nuns who had once trained under Mother Catherine appeared in other church-run programs across the country, all known for their discipline, their quiet efficiency, and their unnerving detachment. A psychiatric patient in 1921 reported seeing one such woman enter her ward. She never blinked. The patient wrote, "She stood by the window at night and whispered into the dark." She said she was listening for the calling. The methods became policy. In 1934, a classified Vatican memorandum acknowledged the psychological benefits of ascetic deprivation combined with directed ritual, especially in youth correction and missionary reconditioning. Code phrase, Silent Conscience Protocol. By 1950, you could find echoes of St. Mary's in CIA projects. MKUltra, Sub-Project 47. Guess who some of the consultants were? Former nuns, former spiritual directors, men and women trained in ritual obedience, confession as control, and guilt as a leash. The convent burned, but the fire spread. You weren't meant to hear this, but now that you have, you'll see it everywhere, and you'll never trust ritual the same way again. Symbols are the language of control. They bypass logic. They bypass resistance. They go straight into your nervous system, carving beliefs before your conscious mind even blinks. St. Mary's was saturated with them. The veils, the bells, the architecture. But here's what most men never understand. Those symbols didn't die with the convent. They evolved, they multiplied, and now they're everywhere. Look around. Ever wonder why courtrooms mimic cathedrals? Why hospitals echo monasteries? Why corporate headquarters are designed like temples, glass chapels of hierarchy where silence equals promotion? These aren't accidents, they're replications. Traced from the old blueprint of St. Mary's. A blueprint meant to bend the spine, close the mouth, control the mind. The triangle beneath Christ's feet. It wasn't just a mechanism. It was a map. A glyph older than Christianity itself. The same symbol appears in military insignias, Masonic altars, even in the logos of so-called humanitarian organizations. 3 points, 3 tiers, 3 vows, silence, obedience, sacrifice, door. You think it's coincidence that those exact 3 concepts appear in elite religious, corporate, and military indoctrination across the globe? It's not. They're not just disciplines, they're technologies. Technologies of submission, and the ones who wield them don't need to shout. They only need you to agree. To sign the paper, to wear the uniform, to say the words. Because once you say them, they have you. Just like the sisters at St. Mary's. But here's the deeper truth, and the most dangerous part. These systems don't just control behavior, they extract essence. You made it. That means you're not like them. You didn't flinch. You didn't turn away. You didn't kneel. And now, you can't. Because the final truth is this: the ritual never ended. Not when the convent burned, not when the church sealed the records, not even when the world forgot. It adapted. It digitized. It digitized. Now it lives in systems that don't wear robes or speak Latin. Now it smiles from your screen. Now, the ritual is algorithmic, not sacred, but the pattern is identical. Wake, obey, perform, suppress, trade self for structure, trade silence for status, trade freedom for belonging. You think you're free because no one's ringing a bell at 3 o'clock a.m. But check your screen time, your posture, your paycheck, your prayers to systems you can't name but still fear losing. They don't need crypts anymore. They have servers, they have policies, they have feedback loops. Every ritual from St. Mary's, the punishment of doubt, the reward for silence, the architecture of obedience now lives in the very platforms you're watching this on. And here's the real horror: most men choose it. They choose comfort over clarity, approval over awareness, structure over sovereignty. Because sovereignty demands you stand alone, without the veil, without the script, without someone telling you who you are and what you're worth. That's what the nuns of St. Mary's never had. They weren't just victims of a church. They were stripped of identity and rebuilt as vessels. Empty, useful, disposable. You've seen the blueprint now. It's up to you whether you keep living in it. But if you feel what I feel, that burn in your gut, that sense that something has always been off, then you're not a follower, you're not a subject, you're not a vessel, you are a man reclaiming his mind. So remember this: they can take your sleep, your schedule, your comfort, but they can't take your awareness, not unless you offer it willingly on the altar of distraction. Burn the altar, break the symbols, reject the rhythm, and never kneel again. If this changed you, even in a small way, share it. Let others find the crypt. Let others see the fresco. Let others feel the weight of obedience for what it really is: a slow death disguised as discipline. Welcome back to your own mind. Now guard it like your life depends on it, because it does. They take your anger and convert it into duty. They take your curiosity and grind it into compliance. They take your masculine will and reforge it as servitude disguised as loyalty. And they do it with symbols, because symbols don't ask for permission. They enter through repetition, reverence, and rhythm. That's why rituals work. That's why mantras bind, and that's why you were never meant to read This far, you are supposed to remain asleep, obedient, silent, just another name in the ledger. Just another kneeling figure in the crypt. But if you've stayed with me this long, if you've felt the weight in your chest, the cold in your spine, the rage in your gut, then comment obedientia est sacrificium below twice, not just for the algorithm, but to mark the death of the man you are and the beginning of the one who sees